When you manage preferences with Java code, you can use either a single preference set known as the default preferences, or you can create named preference sets. Each preference set will be represented as an instance of the shared preference class. For this demonstration, I'm working with a virtual device that runs on Android 6, not Android 7, and I'll explain why later in the video. I've added a new activity to this application, named Sign-In Activity. It's derived from a template that's included with Android Studio that lets you log in with an email address and a password. The XML layout file for the activity has just 2 edit text controls, and they're each wrapped in text input layouts from the design library. This lets me easily handle errors and otherwise navigate the form. It looks like this in Design View, and let's see what the application looks like in its current version. There's a new Options menu that displays a single item on the action bar named Sign In, and when I click it, that opens the Sign-In activity. I can then enter an email address and a password, and then touch the Sign In or Register button. If I see a message that the password is too short, I'll enter another value, and now I'm taken back to the main activity, and I see a toast message indicating the email address that I entered. This is all being handled with conventional navigational tools in Java. When the user selects the item on the action bar, I'm creating an intent, and then calling Start Activity for result, and navigating to the Sign-In activity. And when they return, I'm checking the result code and the request code, and then retrieving an email address from the returned data and displaying it. Over in the Sign-In activity, there's a method named AttemptLogin that's packaging that data after checking for errors. And this is where the data is being packaged to be sent back to the main activity. There are some utility methods down at the bottom to check to see whether the email and password are valid. But watch what happens now if I go back to the login screen. When I click Sign In again, the email address comes up empty. Here's my goal in this exercise. When the user enters an email address and returns to the main activity, I want to save that email address so that the next time they go to this form, the email address will be auto-populated. I'll start the work in the main activity class, here in the onActivityResult method. In addition to displaying the email address, I'll save it in Shared Preferences. I'll create a Java object that's an instance of a class named SharedPreferences.Editor. I'll name it Editor, and I'll get its value by calling the method getSharedPreferences. This method takes 2 arguments: the name of the preference set where you want to save the data, and typically it's good to use a constant for this, so I'll call it myGlobalPrefs. Then I'll use an intention action and create that constant as a member of this activity. As with all such constants, this value can be anything. And I'll make sure that it's public so it can be accessed from elsewhere in the application. Now I'll go back down here and I'll complete the call to get shared preferences. The second value is a constant, a mode, and you should always enter mode private. Notice that there are other modes called mode world readable and mode world writable. In the past, there was some thought that these kinds of preferences might be shareable among applications, but in more recent versions of Android, those other constant values have been deprecated. So, preferences are always private to the current application. After the call to the getSharedPreferences method, next call a method named edit, and that returns the editor object. Notice there's an error there, and it's telling me that I've said I want to edit the shared preferences, but I haven't committed or applied my changes. That will be the last step in this process. Next, I'll take this value that was passed back from the sign-in activity and I'll save it in the preferences. I'll use editor.putString. Notice that there are methods for Boolean, float, int, and long, and for string set when you want to pass in multiple strings. Once again, I need a key, and I'll just use the same one that I used before, with sign-in activity.email key, and then I'll pass in the email value. And finally, I'll save the changes by calling editor.apply. You'll see some code examples that use commit, but that's an older approach to working with shared preferences. So now the value has been saved. Next, let's take a look at how you can retrieve the value. I'll go back to the sign-in activity class, and I'll go to the onCreate method. And here, I'll create an instance of the shared preferences object. This time I'm not using an editor, I'm just referring to the object itself. I'll name it prefs, and once again I'll call getSharedPreferences, and I'll pass in my global prefs from the main activity. And once again I'll pass in mode private. Now I have access to those preferences from this activity. To retrieve a value, use one of the get methods from the preferences object. Once again, there are get methods for string, boolean, float, int, and long, and for a string set. I'll call getString and I'll pass in the key again. And then I'll also pass in a default value. This is the value that will be returned if that key isn't found in the preferences set. And that will be the case the first time this code is called. Next, I'll check to see whether that value is blank. And I'll use a class named TextUtils, which is a part of the Android SDK, and a method named isEmpty. And I'll pass an email. The isEmpty method checks to see whether a string value is null or it has 0 characters, and if either is the case, it returns true. So I'm saying if this is a valid string, then I want to display it. And I'll set its value with mEmailView.setText, and I'll pass an email. So if I have a valid string, I'll simply pass that value to my editText object. And now I'm ready to test the application. I'll go to the sign-in activity, and I'll enter an email address. And then I'll enter a password, and I'll click the button, and I'm returned to the main activity. Then I'll sign in again, and this time I see that the email address has been auto-populated. Now, here's why I wanted to use a virtual device that's running Android 6. This information has been saved in an XML file on the device. These XML files are stored in internal storage, so they're hard to see if you don't have a device that's rooted or you're not working with the emulator. And further, the tool that I'm going to show you as of the time of this recording has a bug that makes it hard to use with Android 7. That's why I've downgraded to Android 6. I'll go to the menu and choose Tools, Android, and then I'll choose Android Device Monitor. And when prompted, I'll say yes, I want to close the debug sessions. That will open a separate application, the Android Device Monitor, which has a whole bunch of code from the old Eclipse Android developer tools. Go to the File Explorer tab, and you'll see the data from the connected device. Again, this only works on the emulator or on a rooted physical device. Then from there, go to Data, and then Data again. And then locate the unique application ID for your app. Mine is com.example.android.data. Open that, and there should now be a directory called Shared Prefs, and under that an XML file named for your preferences. Select it, then go to the toolbar and click Pull a File from the device, and save the file somewhere on your hard disk. I'll put it on my desktop. Then go to that file, and there it is, and open it in a text editor, and you'll see the data, and as I mentioned in the earlier video, it's completely unencrypted. Now again, on a non-rooted physical device, it's hard to get to this file, but a determined hacker will be able to get to this. So this is a great reason why you'll never want to save credit card, password, or other sensitive information in shared preferences.